Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you warmly to Art Salon as part of the Art Basel Miami Beach program. My name is Dan Cameron. I'm from New York and New Orleans. I run an organization called Prospect New Orleans that does a biennial there every other year. We hope to be the largest biennial in the United States and a regular companion when you all come down to Miami Beach in the future, that you'll zip over to New Orleans as well. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Lucy Walker. Lucy's a filmmaker, and you probably know her most because her newest film is called Wasteland. Wasteland is a full-length documentary about the artist Vic Muniz. And as we were catching up a little bit in the green room just before, I learned that Lucy really is more of a narrative filmmaker. And as I watched Wasteland the other night, I was really struck by the fact that it seems that in our, if you'll excuse me, sort of insular art world, you know, we're very protective of our own, and we like to think that we are maybe the best judges of what an artist does or what art is. And I have rarely come across a situation where someone who is not of our little village is able to explore an artist's psyche so effectively. Anyone who has seen Wasteland has come away deeply moved by the experience. I don't know of any other film about a living artist that compares to this film. And while I'm plugging away at it, I do want to mention that tomorrow night, Art Basel Miami Beach would like to invite all of you and everybody you know to a free screening of the film at 8:30 p.m. at the Lincoln Theater on Lincoln Road. Now, because it's free, it's also first come, first serve. You'd probably do best to get there more like 8 or 8:15 just to make sure that you have a seat. It's a large cinema, but judging from the word of mouth that Wasteland has gotten so far, and from the conversations I've had with people over the last day, everyone wants to see this film if they haven't seen it already. So welcome, Lucy, to Miami Beach, and thank you so much.
I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we're very happy to have you here. The first question I want to ask is, how did you pick this subject? How did you approach, what was the germ of the idea of doing a film about Vic Muniz?
It's so interesting. When you make a film, I always think it's as hard to talk about as falling in love. You know, you don't, a good one doesn't come along very often. And so it's hard to sort of quantify, and in hindsight it all seems very neat, but it's sort of always a miracle, honestly, I think. And this one was a really beautifully organic collaboration, but very unexpected. I'm always constantly having conversations with everyone I meet, and I love meeting people, about films and ideas and projects and possibilities, and always sort of scanning for opportunities. And it was just a very random conversation at a film festival, somebody saying, oh, you should meet Vic, and I said, oh, I love Vic's work, and they introduced me to a producer who had met Vic, who liked his work and wanted to make a film about art but didn't really know what to do, had thought that Vic had a wonderful slideshow about the history of art, which I agreed with, but I didn't think that was any kind of a thing that I could make an interesting film out of. Somebody might be able to see that, but I didn't know how to do that. But I was really excited to meet Vic just because I loved his work. And so the producer and I went to meet him when he had an opening in Newcastle in England at the Baltic Gallery. At that point I was living in London for a couple of years. And we really hit it off, and we talked and talked and talked. And then we went to have another conversation a month later in Vic's studio in New York and just continued the conversation. And I guess all the while, on a deep level, I'm scanning for an opportunity and an idea, but superficially we were just talking about his work and my process and his process.
So you really knew him for a while before you made the decision, I'm going to make a film on this artist? Or by the time you got together in New York?
It was always a possibility, but it was, honestly, it was more driven of, and that was sort of on the table, but it's so unlikely that these things work out. It's like, you know, it's like every again, every
Every great
person you
idea.
meet, you know, you're not going to fall in love with every person you meet. You know, there's always an idea, there's always a possibility of a film. But I'm so used to the fact that it's so rarely, you know, results in a sort of full-term project. So I guess the question with Vic was, if we were to make a film together, how might we approach that? And so it's sort of an interesting thing. Traditionally, I suppose, with documentaries, there's a thing happening, and then you decide to film it, and that's the documentary, sort of. And then, you know, that's clearly not adequate. But that's a general, at least, sort of cause and effect of it all somehow. Whereas this one was much more collaborative, because you know, it wasn't true that he was already just going to do this and said, well, hey, let's make a film about it. And I said, okay, sure, and shut up with the camera. It was more sort of thinking about meeting him and being excited about that, and be excited about the possibility of making a film about the creative process, and having a producer that was also very excited about trying to understand the creative process, but also on practical level, Vic and I discovered that we were both obsessed with garbage.
Hence the title of the film, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And although I still think the title's a little depressing, and we could have maybe, I was in a bit of a hurry with the title, and I'm never sure, sometimes I'm never quite sure it's the best title, but I love the title, but it's at the end of the alphabet, you like, you know.
Well, it's not a
anyway.
Depressing film at all.
Exactly. It's very uplifting, and it sounds,
yes.
So I guess I like the play on that. Anyway, I digress. So there we were, talking about garbage. I'd loved, particularly Vic has a series, which some of you may be familiar with, called Pictures of Junk. And his play with scale, I thought, was super cinematic and fantastic, and I just love looking at those pieces so much. And Vic talks about it in the movie very eloquently, but this idea of you know, the play with scale, that your eye gets sucked into the detail and then sucked out to see the whole picture, and he's so playful with that. And that, for me, also reminded me of the sort of practice of making these documentaries, where you start out very far away and you get very close to people. We start out very far away from the people in the landfill, and we get close, and also how the film is a whole that's made up of scenes. I just thought there was so much sort of fun to be had, and it was just also fun as a substance, the junk. I just thought it was particularly visually sort of arresting. And so when I was talking to Vic about his pieces, I would always come back to, I love those pictures of junk, and then saying, well, have you ever thought about working with garbage? And him saying yes, and how he'd wanted to do this project in a landfill, but it had been too dangerous because they run guns and drugs and dead bodies through landfills in Brazil. And anyone with a camera, there was a horrible story, for example, about a journalist that had been necklaced. The drug traffickers had taken tires and set light to them, put the tires around the journalist's neck and set light to them. Horrible stuff. You wouldn't want to go with a camera.
And we wouldn't want that to happen to
exactly.
you either.
So,
no.
So on the other hand, I thought, oh my goodness, but that's, you know, there's nothing like a little drama. No, I clearly safety first, but we won't even talk about the film I made on Everest. But anyway, but clearly you want safety, but you also want a challenge. And I guess it comes back to, from my perspective as a filmmaker, coming from this background of sort of quite narrative-driven documentary films, to sustain these 90-minute films that are funded with the intention of, you know, at least the delusion of being, you know, box office recoupable somehow, right, in a 90-minute sort of theatrical experience. You have to think really narratively, beginning, middle, end, character, you know, dramatic arc sort of stuff. At least that's the way I like to tackle things. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about, or how do you make a film about the creative process using a genius like Vic? And I'm conjuring, looking at all of Vic's work and thinking, well, that project, that would make an interesting documentary film. It's really challenging. I think the art is, I'm particularly compelled by it, and I think there's the opportunity for sort of thematic resonance with, it is just really rich. And I happen to have been obsessed with garbage because 10 years ago, I was studying at NYU, and I was trying to quit smoking, so I joined this triathlon club, and I met this woman who was teaching a seminar in garbage, and thought that she was really interesting, and started going along to her seminar so I could see these art films about garbage. Actually, like there's a film called Ilha das Flores, which is a Brazilian short about the life cycle of a tomato. And it's really cool, and you can't see it anywhere. And 10 years ago, I guess it was still pretty hard to find stuff. And then her class took a trip to a landfill in New York, in Staten Island, and I was just really curious. And being me, sort of decided to go along. And
was this a sociology class?
It was a PhD into, it was a graduate. She was doing her PhD, but it was a graduate interdisciplinary seminar at NYU in the humanities school, and it was fascinating. Sort of a look at sanitation. All kinds of like what garbage is made up of, the politics of garbage, the chemistry. There's all kinds of interesting sort of stuff about decomposition.
Interdisciplinary look at garbage.
Exactly. Anyway, blah blah. So I went along to this landfill, and not an academic experience at all. Being in a landfill, it really, it mugs you through the nose, and it really got to me. In a very basic realization, oh my God, everything I've ever thrown away in New York City didn't just vanish like you sort of thought it might. And it actually all came here, and it all showed up at once, and it stank, and I was standing on top of it, and I was sort of mortified that this thought had not really, I thought I was all environmental and green and recycled and the rest of it, but when you're standing on a bunch of garbage, and you've contributed it, massively, it was really kind of humbling. And I thought that was, again, a really powerful, that kind of powerful thing. Again, as a filmmaker, you need some energy, otherwise these films are boring. So you need that kind of punchy, that's a kind of check mark, and you think, okay, must make landfill location. And it was also so visual. There were plastic bags, like a foot thick, flapping on this chain link fence had been snared. You never want to use a plastic bag again, which is, by the way, a very good idea. And it was just such just visually, all these little bits of stuff, and very Vic Munizi, in terms of, it was perfect. So, of course, Vic would be interested in garbage, and 10 years later, when we came to talk about it, of course, we discovered this, and we both, got excited, and I knew that this could make an amazing film. I'd also known about the catadoras, which are these people who go through their garbage recycling by hand. And again, having all these conversations with Vic and being familiar with his work, I'd known that he'd done some really interesting social projects. He's really great, actually, with, he'd done some projects with street kids and different kids with plantations, but the Sugar Children, I guess, was his first project that put him on the map, and that was done with some children of plantation workers. But he's actually done several projects, some of which I guess aren't even particularly well known to the art world, but are more of his kind of giving back or educational stuff. And he's really, really talented at interacting with people and collaborating, and I think has given it a lot of thought. And again, as a documentary filmmaker, I knew that those people and those relationships would be really dramatic, and that we'd meet these people that we'd never normally meet, these people that sift through garbage for a living. And they've got to have some stories. And I knew that interaction between Vic and them, I knew that Vic had grown up poor. So all these organic conversations meant that when he said, oh yeah, I tried to work in a garbage dump once, I thought, oh my God, the light bulb went on. I knew that had the potential to be this. And then there was the mechanics if we happened to have a wonderful producer, and then, but as a sort of practical point, I said to Vic, if you ever do anything about that project, if you discuss it with your wife, your collaborators, anything, just call me first so I can get there with a camera. I want to film everything. Promise me nothing will happen on this project while I'm not filming it. That's the only thing that we need to agree upon, and then I'll make the film.
And you actually worked with Vic for close to 3 years?
It was very on and off.
Right, but that's a long time to be engaged in an active collaboration with a Maybe not
I think
in,
I'm
in
used
the
to it.
film.
I think it's
You're-
tough for the people that are in the films because it's so exhausting being filmed. I'm sort of in for the long haul, so I'm like used to that sort of slog and ludicrous timescale, which makes no sense to anybody else who isn't a filmmaker. But these things take ages. I actually made another film in the middle, and there was all kinds of on and off and twisty turns. It's an ordeal. These things are awful. I don't recommend documentary filmmaking to anyone. Make art. You can do it in a day. It's great, right?
Now, have you been surprised by how emotional people's responses are to it? I mean, I know as someone who's known Vic for a very long time, and I thought I knew him well, that you really bring us all into a side of Vic's existence and an aspect of his life and his desire to give back to society.
Yeah.
That frankly, as a New Yorker, I never knew that was part of who he was or what he was doing. And suddenly we're brought into an aspect of an artist's life.
Yeah.
It's not that I think he was trying to keep it private, but he is a modest person. And he doesn't go around bragging about his social, the things he does to help society.
Yeah.
And also there's no obvious social message in his work.
Yeah.
So you've really gone behind the scenes and showed us what an artist is as a human, but at the same time you've really reinforced what it is that goes into making his work so extraordinary.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? And as the film, I keep pinching myself because the film has had such a dreamy reception, at least in the lovely, modest world of documentary filmmaking. It's become a total phenomenon. It's I think won 25 prizes already, and including Sundance of Berlin, which has never happened before in history. And it's really, it's beautiful. It just got shortlisted for the Academy Award, and we're so thrilled with it. It's sort of like we gave birth to Einstein by accident, and we were all there, but somehow you're still surprised when it turns out well, because sometimes you work really hard and it doesn't, as we all know. And but it worked out really well, and as it becomes sort of more of a phenomenon, I guess, and that becomes, it's one project and one moment in Vic's life, and it's a really close look in certain ways. It's interesting, and some parts of Vic aren't really in the movie. For example, Vic is a terrific intellect, brilliant guy. I mean, speaks all these languages. We were on the panel together in Arles at the Rencontre, the photo festival there, which is so fun. And he's speaking fluent French, and you're sitting there thinking, of course, Vic is not just fluent in French, but really conducting elaborate theoretical conversations in a live question-answer format after quite a late night. And he's pretty phenomenal. So he's such an intellect, for example. In the movie, we don't really... Actually, I guess as a filmmaker, I mean, I sort of know that stuff doesn't play very well in terms of screen dynamism. So, for example, he has loads of really interesting theories about garbage. And again, when we're doing all these panels and Q&As together with Vic, and he has fantastically interesting things to say, none of which are in the movie. And it's a completely, but actually just because I think that doesn't, those brilliant ideas, I think, are best suited for different media. And actually, in a narrative type of documentary, you can't hang around. You have to be really cherry-pick the sort of abstracted points you can make, because really you've got character and story, and they're brutally ruthless. When you're trying to deal with people's attention spans in that format. I always look at art videos and films and love the sort of luxury of the beautiful.
These languid, slow takes.
Oh yeah, or just the freedom and the
and
experimentation and the amazing attention that the artist and also I think the critics and the audience bring to it. Man, you'd be skinned if you try and do that to a film audience. You can't hang around for a few seconds, and they'll have you on toast, and they will walk out of the theater. They'll ruin you. They'll laugh at you. I mean, so I feel like film is really brutal, right? I mean, how many films do we, like maybe 10 films a year anyone says are any good? And those are the ones that get made. It's just really, it's a tough thing to...
Well, that reminds me, I was kind of going through the short list of biopics on artists, in my own mind, thinking, all right, if we eliminate all the fictional Hollywood things, and then we just get down to artist documentaries, and then we eliminate all the ones that are motivated for some tragic reason because the artist died,
right.
at a very early age, and you know, I realized that I could not think of any model that I could identify that you had used. In other words, there's no other artist film, not that there are so many, that I saw as being a precursor to what you were doing. It's almost as if you were trying to create a completely new form of documentary.
Huh. It's so interesting. I love that you say that. It's interesting. I reach for, the only thing that I've successfully reached for when I think about comparisons is this film called Quince Tree Sun. And I'm spacing out, what's the name of the painter it's about? Does anyone know? It's a painter and he's very famous and really good. Anyway, you
get bonus points if you know the answer to this question.
But there's a film and about a wonderful painter trying to paint a quince tree. And as the fruit ripens, it gets heavier and messes his like anal grid that he's drawn, and then it starts to mold beautifully. And he's trying to keep up with the oil paints and that every day, and the light's beautiful, and it's sort of eventually he fails, and it's a wonderful, very slow, meditative film about one project that ultimately fails, and somehow that had been in my mind. But the film, in a way, structurally, it's very aligned with I've made my two first films. I've made one in the middle of this, but my two previous films were about sort of similar in the sense that you went into a world, you followed a group of very interesting people on an interesting journey with a beginning, middle, and end in a really interesting world. So my first one was about Amish teenagers going through this process of Rumspringa, where on the 16th birthday they're released from the rules and have a period of experimentation, culminating in a decision on whether to go back to the Amish church or set out into the world on their own. And then my second film was about a blind American mountain climber who climbs Everest and then goes back to Tibet to take some blind Tibetan students up a mountain, and then has a big argument with their blind German teacher about what the hell they're doing, and it all goes really interestingly wrong. So those were all, you know, whether it's the world of the Amish or the world of Tibet or the world of the garbage dump, in a way I'm sure that I was thinking structurally of those two films, and it's similar sort of ensemble of amazingly interesting people, slightly different, but Vic, and it was really interesting for me to put Vic up against the people in the landfill. It's just dramatic stuff.
What was the biggest difficulty or challenge in making the film? I think that they're, you know, considering the amount of time. Pardon me?
The smell of the garbage. Apart from the smell, carry on.
Apart from the olfactory factor.
Yes, exactly.
You know, it seems very daunting to have taken on this project, and there must have been some point where you just said, I don't know if this is really worth what I got into. Can you give us maybe a little insight without giving too much away?
I'd still go with the smell, but I think, I guess with all these things, some things we had were really good. We had a great producer who, I think he thinks, in retrospect, he was bananas and he's learned his lesson now. No, he's very proud. But he really believed in Vic's process and my process and was really thrilled. And Vic was super respectful of my process and me of his. And there was such a strong grounding in that. And there was never, there was never any angst about, he never had input on the cut or anything like that. He was really super, he was just an artist. He was just a joy in those big ways. He really got it. And we had amazing collaborators, amazing Brazilian co-directors, cameraman, editor, just brilliant people. And so in some ways, that really made up for some of the challenges. Honestly, these things, it's just a sort of, it is about hanging in there through twists and turns. We all sort of went through, I think we all sort of went through like sort of breakups and crazy challenges and grief and loss and disruption in our lives, everyone making it. And sometimes it's sort of about hanging in with these projects through a few you know, but in a funny way, I feel like we all felt like we come through our own sort of personal garbage dump and been recycled. And somehow this movie doing so beautifully well is so sweet in that way too, because it's sort of about recycling the spirit, and it's about courage and dignity through life's twists and turns. And I feel like all of us making the movie felt like, you know, we were all hanging in there through. And even these movies, I mean, 3 or 4 years, it's been 4 years since we began now, and we finished it, we premiered in January, but it still, you know, continues to kick our asses, you know, in its own way.
Would you be surprised if it wound up getting theatrical release throughout the country? As opposed
it is.
To
it's rolling out right now. It's
I know it's in about.
like
I know
virus.
about a
It's
dozen
amazing.
cities that it's in. Or no,
Yes, and that's for, as I keep saying, for a documentary about garbage that's half in Portuguese. It's pretty wild to find it in a US
we like to
theater.
think it's a documentary about one of our favorite artists.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, really. No, and that's true. I joke about that. But the truth is that I think it is about the transformative power of art, and it is about Vic Muniz, and it is about a particular project. And it really, I mean, the feedback that I keep getting is that it's the most compelling argument for art that people have seen on a screen. And I love that, but and in some way that was Vic's intention. Vic has this very explicit question that he asks at the beginning, which is, can art be helpful to these people that live in a landfill, that have had no exposure to it? What can it do for them? Can it give them another way of seeing their lives, or what? And I think the answer is, you know, really a fantastically resounding yes. And that's really exciting, I think, for people that love art and also support arts education. I think we're getting a lot of wonderful excitement around that, and I personally feel really great about that, because that sort of chimes with what I believe to be true, that art can be, you know, not, you know, it can be, you know, it is a benefit to humankind in the biggest and most beautiful way.
Well, as someone who works as a curator, and I often work with kind of more vanguard or experimental practices, I have sought many, many years for a tool where I can say to someone who thinks that art is just way too elitist and hard to get to, something where you can just hand somebody and say, go home, look at this, and then let's have a conversation. Because he seems to fulfill these dreams of social relevance that so many artists want to, they really dream about, but he's doing it. And I think it's one of the most compelling arguments for the vitality of contemporary art as a social practice that I have ever experienced.
No, absolutely. And I didn't bargain on it. You know, I thought it might all go south. I was going to use a more vulgar expression there, but I really didn't. He's done lots of social projects, but he had just had this horrible experience in Sao Paulo working with street kids, and I think it was a small project, a carnival confetti, I believe, and street kids in Sao Paulo, and he had actually been rather disheartened that the kids, even by the age of 7, had already been so hurt by drugs and abuse and horror, and were unable to really engage or benefit from anything. And I don't even know if they threatened him physically. I mean, really, it wasn't pretty. And so I wasn't sure that the answer to his question, can art help these people, you know, and can we make a film about the transformative power of art? I was not sure that the answer was going to be yes. I knew that I just knew that the question was sufficiently interesting and important that I would, you know, push the button. And I knew that I really believed in that question. And I was really curious to find out the answer. And what's wonderful about the film is when we began the film, we just had no idea what was going. So the lovely advantage of that process by which there was no thing before we started filming the thing, and you really see the beginning stages of the project before we had any idea where it was headed, is that the audience really gets to go, and I think that's part of the secret why it's such a wonderful film for audiences, is that you really go on the journey with us. And at the beginning, Vic, like myself, was petrified. I had so many vaccinations when I got to the dump that I couldn't move my arms, and that was before I put the 16 layers of like protective moon gear on the first time I went there, and every time you went there you wore less protective gear. But And Vic, you can see him in the film. He says in the film, it's where everything good ends up, including everything that's not good ends up, including the people. And by the end, they're his best friends, and you can't believe that the big reveal, of course, is that they're the most courageous, dignified, inspiring people that sort of put me to shame you could possibly imagine. There's a woman who takes the produce that's being ditched, that's past its sell-by date, and she takes the utensils that have been thrown out, and she takes the methane jets that are hot air, and she cooks using the hot outgassing with the garbage utensils and the garbage produce, and she makes delicious food for everyone. She says, they sing me happy birthday even when it's not my birthday, when I make them stew, for example. And she's a restaurant cook, and she cooks out of the garbage, and there's a Chiao, who's the young leader, who doesn't just, sort of pick the books. He reads them, and he sort of doesn't pick recycling white paper. He actually reads them. There's actually another guy too who recycles the paper in the dump. They each sort of pick their different material that they concentrate in.
Right.
But he takes the books out of the dump, and he gives them to this guy, Chow, who's the young leader of their association, their sort of co-op. And Chow dries the garbage juice off Machiavelli's The Prince and reads it because he's interested in leadership, and makes extremely astute comparisons between Florence in the 16th century and Rio, because they have these favelas on these hillsides ruled by these feuding drug lords with these private armies. It's this warring fiefdom sort of system, and all the power plays that go in. He studies earnestly because he wants to be the leader of this co-op, and he's been never been to school and has been sifting through recyclables since the age of 11. And he's just gobsmackingly brilliant. So you really, it's really like Shakespeare got there first and wrote the characters for us. It's really surprising.
And again, if we'd been watching a fictional film and somebody had written that scene, people would be scoffing, saying that's impossible. Well, Lucy, you have just, you've made a really, really brilliant film. You've, I think, done a real service to the art world. You really have it, and to society as well.
My honor.
And even though we're a little bit over time, we have just a couple of extra minutes for questions. I feel there's at least one burning question in the room, and that's you.
You just get so involved with the characters.
Oh, well, we'll wait till the...
Hello, 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 hello.
That was the decoy.
I would like to ask a question too after.
All right, we have just enough time for 2 questions.
Just so involved.
Did you see the movie?
Yes, I
did. Oh,
did.
Great.
When I saw that you were going to be speaking, I saw it on Tuesday before I flew down here.
Great.
I cut out of work and said,
I love it.
Do this. And I just wonder how much a connection you're still keeping with the people. I mean, you do a little bit of a synopsis at the end. But it's...
Oh yeah, we're all very connected. And Vic particularly, because Vic, most of all, in fact, Vic is very funny about it. And he's going to be, I think, doing questions and answers after
He will, after
tomorrow.
the screening tomorrow night. Vic Munoz will be there. So if you can bear watching again.
Yeah, and he's very funny, and he says that Chow and he are best mates at this point. And Chow will call up Vic and say, God, they keep asking me about art, what shall I tell them? And Vic's like, I don't know, man, because they keep asking me about garbage, and they're really, and you can see in the movie that actually they're sort of kindred spirits, which is, again, one of the fun things that I think the audience can get to observe. But you do get really, really involved. And part of that is, I think, again, Vic's gift is really, it is a side that people, I think, in the art world don't know about him, but I think he's just got a really wonderful way of relating to people.
Yes.
And I sort of love to have that, to really feel like the audience can have a very direct window. And I sort of try and think about that a lot in what I do, and I notice that it's really what audiences love is walking in. It's so simple, but if you can really get a skillful filmmaker can really let you walk in somebody's shoes. And there's a lot of disadvantages to documentary, but as you said, with a documentary, the advantage is that they're real, and that's incredibly powerful and moving. And I don't think you see people like this on the big screen. I try and think of other movies where you see poor people that you get to know and you like, and they're cool, and they're really like interesting to hang out with, sort of people, which is very unusual, and yet the poverty is very intense too, and yet it's not. It's somehow palatable because you have Vic and the art and the excitement of the project. So thank you so much for saying that. I see how proud I am of the movie. I could bore you for ages about why I think it's great.
Bore, I'm not sure, but ages definitely. Other question?
Yes, I would like to ask a question about the process. Since we're so jaded with authorship, I would like to ask about the collaborative aspect of the movie. Considering that, I would like to know how was your relationship and collaboration with the two other co-directors, since they were down there in Brazil, and most of the movie is in Portuguese, and they were dealing with it. Adding that one of the co-directors actually did two movies that I consider pretty precursors to the film Vic, one about Ernesto Neto and one about Leo Nilsson. Which have a lot of things that happen in Vic's movies. As a documentary has some.
Are you friends with them? I'm just curious. You're friends with Joao, Karen, who we're talking about? Did they send you? Oh my God!
No, he's a very informed source from an artist.
Very informed source. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your collaboration with them.
We had, like I said, great collaborations with fantastic people. Joao is great. Karen is great. Janaína, Vic's now ex-wife, is in the movie as well, and there's a lot of people in the art world are very familiar with her. And so there's a lot of tremendous people involved in the movie. And what else? A fantastic cinematographer as well, fantastic editor. There's a funny story about that, which I will spare you. And collaboration, I mean, it is interesting. And you know, there's a lot of people involved in this movie, and I've never heard that before about the Ernesto Neto or whatever it is. I don't.
Leo Nilsson.
I mean, what was that?
Leo Nilsson is an extraordinary Brazilian artist who passed away.
Oh yeah. I actually haven't seen those projects, or nobody's made those comparisons before. So sort of that's interesting. I should look at those movies and think about that. That was never sort of raised as part of our collaboration. So that's sort of an interesting point I should check out. But there you go.
Well, I am so sorry to say that we are running out of time. Just a further reminder, this is Lucy Walker. She's off taking a plane, I think, tomorrow to get probably another award for the film.
They announced it already, actually. We are getting an award. So unfortunately,
she's
I'm
getting
not going to
an
make the
award
screening because
tomorrow.
I have to go to the award. But don't worry, because Vic is here, and he's the star. So it's going to be a really fun screening.
Yeah, there'll be a Q&A after tomorrow night's screening. It'll be me again with Vic Munoz. But will you please join me in thanking and welcoming and saying
thank you for being
sayonara
here.
to Lucy Walker.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.